shocks, improving productivity in vital economic activities, and supporting microfinance and SMEs of Afghani entrepreneurs. Ladies and gentlemen, since 1975, the Islamic Development Bank has established itself as a trustworthy AAA rated multilateral development bank and South-South partner. For 46 years, it has built a proven track record of supporting its member countries' inclusive and sustainable socio-economic development. Acting upon the decades-long trust vested by its member countries, the Islamic Development Bank would be honored to accept proposed new mandate to manage the Afghanistan Humanitarian Trust Fund. We will rely on our solid and extensive expertise and experience in efficiently managing various trust funds such as the Islamic Solidarity Fund for Development, Al-Aqsa Fund, Al-Quds Fund, Lives and Livelihoods Fund, and the Awqaf Properties and Investment Fund, apiel. We also had experience in managing the Aceh program in Indonesia, cyclone effect management in Bangladesh, Endowment Fund for Children Education with UNICEF and King Salman Humanitarian and Relief Center, and Smart Education Initiative with Global Partnership for Education and the Arab Coordinating Group, in addition to working in many fragile and post-conflict contexts. Our work is valued by our trusted development partners such as the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, UN aid agencies, the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, the Saudi Fund for Development, Qatar Foundation, Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, and the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, to name a few. The IDB, the Islamic Development Bank, may also provide the necessary platform for neighboring and regional countries to play a positive role in capacity development and technical assistance for institutional building by leveraging our unique reverse linkage mechanism for South-South cooperation. That could include also what was suggested by Mr. Qureshi for a group of experts from OIC, United Nations, and IFIs to address the issues of financial connectivity of Afghanistan. The Islamic Development Bank may also provide the necessary, leveraging its vast experience with the fragile states and exemplary credentials to manage such funds. The Islamic Development Bank is well positioned to act as the trustee and administrator of the proposed Afghanistan Humanitarian Trust Fund. We look for generous support from all countries, international, regional, and bilateral organizations, private sector, philanthropists, to announce their pledges to this fund. I hope today's forum will result in outcomes that will enable us to leverage the intrinsic Afghan entrepreneurial spirit to create local employment opportunities to ensure long-term peace, prosperity, and growth in Afghanistan and beyond. I reiterate my thanks and appreciation to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation for this well-timed initiative. I also extend my special thanks to the government of Pakistan for its generosity and hospitality. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I thank Chairman Dr. Muhammad Salman Al-Jasir for his remarks and contributions to our discussions. I will now request Mr. Martin Griffiths, Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, who is representing UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, to come to the rostrum and deliver his remarks.
Thank you very much indeed. And Honourable Prime Minister, Excellencies, friends and colleagues, it's my privilege here to represent the Secretary General of the United Nations, who wishes he could also have been here, but the words that I will speak are his. As the Honourable Minister of Pakistan has already said, I have spoken elsewhere of the fact that Afghanistan's economy is now in free fall, and that if we don't act decisively and with compassion, I fear that this fall will pull down the entire population with it. 23 million people are already facing hunger. Health facilities are overflowing with malnourished children. Some 70% of teachers are not getting paid, and millions of children, Afghanistan's future, are out of school. The value of the Afghani currency is plummeting. Trade is damaged by the lack of confidence in the financial sector, as we have heard, and the space for borrowing and investment has constricted dramatically. So the need for liquidity and stabilization of the banking system, again, as we have heard from a number of speakers, is now urgent, not only to save the lives of the Afghan people, but also to enable humanitarian organizations to respond and operate effectively. I welcome the decision by the World Bank's Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund to transfer $280 million by the end of December to UNICEF and the World Food Programme. This step should be followed by reprogramming of the whole fund to support the people of Afghanistan this winter. Families simply do not have the cash for everyday transactions, while prices for key commodities continue to rise. The cost of wheat and fuel are up by around 40%, and food now accounts for more than 80% of average household expenditure. Basic social services that all Afghans depend on are collapsing as international development support, upon which the country has depended for so long, has frozen up. By the middle of next year, as estimated by UNDP, universal poverty may reach 97% of the population of Afghanistan. That could be the next grim milestone. Within a year, 30% of Afghanistan's GDP could be lost altogether, could be, while male unemployment may double to 29%. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation is coming today together to express the willingness, as we have heard, to help avert this disaster and to contribute to the humanitarian endeavor. And I am here to say, Excellencies, that the United Nations stands firmly with you and your efforts and your plans, and both of us in solidarity with the people of Afghanistan. Next year, the United Nations will seek funding for the largest ever appeal for humanitarian assistance for a country, an annual appeal of about $4.5 billion to help the most vulnerable in Afghanistan with life-saving assistance. But our plan is a stopgap measure for over 21 million people who need that assistance. Of course, it must be funded as a matter of priority. But the crisis is huge. The humanitarian response is effective and it continues to scale up. And thanks to generous donor support, the Afghanistan response plan for 2021 was fully funded, a unique achievement in these years. But going forward, we need more than this. Afghanistan will not get through the winter on emergency aid alone, again, as has been said by previous speakers. We also need flexible donor funding that can be used to ensure salaries for public sector workers and support to basic services such as health, education, electricity, livelihoods, to allow the people of Afghanistan some chance to get through this winter and some encouragement to remain home with their families. Going forward, we also need constructive engagement with the de facto authorities in a process of meaningful dialogue to clarify what we expect of each other. The consequences of inaction on these three fronts are clear, and the three fronts are emergency assistance, flexible funding, and an engagement to be clear about what we expect from each other. And if we do not act fast on these three fronts, we know that we risk the collapse of this great country, and people will run out of hope, and the region, and indeed the world, will see destabilization increase with all the consequences that we have seen so clearly in history. Honourable Prime Minister, we're gathered here today at a moment of exceptional gravity for the people of Afghanistan. We have the advantage of being forewarned of the fate that awaits them if we do not act. We have the responsibility, because we are forewarned, knowing that if we do not act with urgency and with a collective will, there will be a terrible reckoning. We have that chance, we have that opportunity, given to us also by those who convened this important international meeting. We cannot fail to do what is right and what we know is possible. Thank you.
I thank UN Under-Secretary General Martin Griffiths for his contribution to our deliberations. I now request His Excellency Imran Khan, Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, for his keynote address.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Secretary General OIC, respected foreign ministers, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me welcome all of you to Pakistan. The irony is that 41 years ago, the extraordinary meeting of the OIC was held in Pakistan. It was discussing Afghanistan. And since then, all the troubles of Afghanistan started. No country has suffered as much as Afghanistan. 40 years of conflict. And then add to it recently prolonged drought, 75% of the people living off the land. And then, even before 15th of August, half the population below the poverty line. Years of corrupt governance. 75% of the budget supported by foreign aid. Now, a country in this situation, after 15th August, if the foreign aid dries up, the foreign reserves get frozen, banking system freezes, any country is going to collapse, let alone Afghanistan, which has suffered for the past 40 years. So I'm really glad all the speakers before me mentioned the gravity of the situation. Especially I would like to point out what Michael Griffith, Under Secretary of the United Nations Secretary General, what he had to say, the figures he gave. So the point is that if the world does not act, this will be the biggest man-made crisis which is unfolding in front of us. We, the OIC, it's a big responsibility on us. because not only is it the situation in Afghanistan as it unfolds, but it's a religious duty to help them. And I must say that we have to, and I speak to the United States specifically, they must de-link the Taliban government from the 40 million Afghan citizens. Even if they've been in conflict with Taliban for 20 years. But this is a question of the people of Afghanistan. 40 million human beings. And that's why it is very important that action is taken immediately. Already we are late. The Afghan winter, everyone knows, is extremely severe. And these preconditions the Taliban have to, unless they have an inclusive government, human rights, women's rights, do not allow terrorism from the soil. Unless these preconditions are met, the humanitarian aid will not flow and their foreign reserves won't be allowed to have them, or the banking system won't be allowed to function. This is very important. That first of all, the one time I met the Taliban foreign minister, he categorically said that they wanted to comply with these three conditions. Now the point is, we must understand that when we talk about human rights, every society is different. Every society's idea of human rights and women's rights are different. I just give you an example of the Pakistan, the Pakhtunkhwa province which borders Afghanistan. Because the culture is similar, because Taliban is basically predominantly a Pashtun movement, and there are more Pashtuns on our side of the border. Now, the city culture is completely different from the rural culture. Culture in Kabul was always different to rural areas. Just like in Peshawar, it is completely different, the culture, to the district adjoining the Afghanistan border. So I give you an example. We give stipends to the child's parents to put the girls into school. But in our tribal districts or the district adjoining Afghanistan, if we are not sensitive to the cultural norms of those people, even with stipends they send the girls to school. But if we are sensitive to their cultural norms, without stipends they are willing to send the girls to school. So this sensitivity, I'm afraid, when we are talking about human rights and women's rights, we have to be sensitive about this. But my big worry is that unless action is taken immediately, and I mean immediately, because we've been saying this for now 2-3 months, unless action is taken immediately, Afghanistan is heading for chaos. Any government, when it can't pay its salaries of its public servants, hospital, doctors, nurses, any government is going to collapse. But chaos suits no one. It certainly does not suit the United States. Because what if there's chaos there, and chaos means the inability, if the Afghan government does not have the ability to fight terrorism. And we know ISIL is now a threat. It has been a threat. We have had attacks from Afghan border, from ISIL into Pakistan. So the only way you can control what is, and ISIL is capable of international terrorism. And the only reason you can deal with it is if there's a stable Afghan government. And same with Pakistan. Our worry is, and remember, Pakistan lost 80,000 people. We were the biggest collateral damage of the Afghan war. Our economy was shattered. Over $100 billion lost to the economy. 3.5 million people internally displaced. Well, the last thing we want is chaos in Afghanistan, more refugees. We already have over 3 million Afghan refugees. To date, we have 234,000 Afghans who've overstayed their visa because their situation in Afghanistan means they can't go back. And remember, this is a country, like most developing countries, who are suffering from the fallout of the coronavirus. COVID-19, we are all suffering from the impact it has had on world economies. So we are in no position to deal with this, another influx of refugees and terrorism. So my request to the international community, to the United States specifically, I know the Europeans are extremely sensitive. They understand the situation. There's a refugee problem not just in Europe, all over the world. So everyone knows that this chaos will lead not just countries like Pakistan and Iran. Other countries will also eventually have refugee problems. But in much richer countries, you have 2,000-3,000 refugees and there's an issue. The far-right parties raise this issue about refugees. But we poor countries, who are struggling, whose economy is just about getting on their feet, how do we cope with hundreds and thousands of refugees? So it is in no one's interest that there's chaos in Afghanistan. And that's why I was very impressed by the Islamic Development Bank's suggestions of immediate, medium and long-term ways of helping the people of Afghanistan or making the economy sustainable. I would look forward to the foreign ministers that you will come up with a roadmap by the end of this evening. And that roadmap not only should be pushed by the OIC, by the United Nations, by the European Union, and by, of course, the United States. Because, as I repeat, chaos in Afghanistan suits no one. And finally, because I have this platform of the OIC foreign ministers, I would just raise two more points. One is Palestine and Kashmir. The people of Palestine and Kashmir look to us. They want to see a unified response from us about their human rights, about their democratic rights, rights which United Nations Security Council resolutions have given them, and unfortunately not implemented. We should, on every forum, raise our voices and a unified stance. And lastly, I want to talk about Islamophobia. Unfortunately, the refugee crisis in Western countries has exacerbated Islamophobia. Islamophobia really started reaching a dangerous levels after 9/11, when terrorism and Islam were connected. When terms like radical Islam came, they connected somehow. Islam was responsible for terrorism and radicalization. So this connection has made life difficult for people living in Western countries, Muslims living in Western countries. The man in the street in the West cannot distinguish between what is a moderate Muslim and what is a radical Muslim. So you have stuff like in New Zealand, a man walks into a mosque and shoots 50 people. It's because this term, radical Islam, Islamic terrorism, they have to be delinked. And secondly, the reason for Islamophobia is people in the West do not understand when our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is mocked or ridiculed or insulted. They can't understand the reaction amongst the Muslims because their attitude to religion is different to ours. So it's very important for the OIC to play its part in explaining to the Western world on forums like European Union, United Nations, their think tanks, making them understand. Rather than this gap growing between Muslims and non-Muslims because of inability to understand Islam, it is our responsibility in the OIC that we make them understand. We have in Pakistan formed an authority, it's called Rahmatul Alamin Authority. The purpose is to have top Pakistani scholars in this authority who coordinate with Muslim scholars all over the world. And one of the objectives of this Rahmatul Alamin Authority is that there should be a considered intellectual response when things like a cartoon appears insulting our Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. There should be a proper response from scholars to make them understand why Muslims react, that the love and reverence we have for our Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, because they don't understand this. And secondly, to make them understand that our Holy Prophet was called Rahmatul Alameen. He was to bring mercy for mankind. He was not called Rahmatul Muslimeen. He was not just for Muslims. Just like our God, Allah, is God of all human beings. So, our Prophet united human beings. His whole message was of love. But this is not, the people in the West do not understand this. There is so much propaganda against Islam. And unfortunately, we do not have a coherent and an intellectual, scholarly response to this. So, one objective of this authority is to, in coordination with all the Muslim scholars, we will respond, and we would like the OIC Secretary General also to know about this response. We will consult you. And whenever anything happens, there should be a proper response to that. But secondly, it's also for my own country, because we feel that we can raise the morality and the ethics of our society by making people understand the seerat of the Prophet, his teachings, to raise the ethical standards in our country, and at the same time unite our people. Because unfortunately, religion is used by elements in our society to divide people, spread hatred. The whole idea is to unite human beings under the teachings of our Prophet. So finally, I again welcome all of you. I hope we have a very productive session this afternoon, and then we come up with a very coherent a strategy which I said immediate, medium term and long term, how to get Afghanistan out of this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for your gracious presence and words of wisdom. I'm sure the House values your thought-provoking address and candor. Your remarks comprehensively covered all important dimensions of today's topic and would guide the proceedings of this extraordinary session. We will now take a break for 10 minutes. Now, the session will resume after 10 minutes, as the next segment would be off-camera. Media personnel and guests in the galleries are kindly requested to leave.
जी नासी नवा खे ॿुधायूं पिया त OIC जे इजलास खे वज़ीराज़म इमरान ख़ान ख़िताब करे रहिया। संदसि चवणो त मुअज़्ज़ज़ महिमान खे पाकिस्तान अचण ते ख़ुशि आमदीद कयां थो। वज़ीराज़म इमरान ख़ान जो चवणो हो त जेतिरियूं मुश्किलूं अफ़गानिस्तान जे मुल्क ॾिठियूं आहिनि, कंहिं मुल्क न आहिनि ॾिठियूं। अफ़गानिस्तान 4 ॾहाकनि खां ख़ाना जंगी जो शिकार रहियो आहे। वज़ीराज़म इमरान ख़ान जो चवणो त अफ़गानिस्तान जी हालत जे करे सभ खां घणो नुक़सान पाकिस्तान खे पहुतो आहे। संदसि चवणो त अफ़गानिस्तान जी मदद करण लाइ फौरी तौर ते क़दम खणणा पवंदा। हीउ अफ़गानिस्तान जी बका जो मामलो आहे। नासीनामा के ॿुधायूं पिया त वज़ीर आज़म इमरान ख़ान जेके OIC जे इजलास के ख़िताब कर रहा है। इस्लामाबाद खां सीधी रीत OIC जो इजलास ॾिसी रहा हो। वज़ीर आज़म इमरान ख़ान जो चवणो त इहा इत्मीनान जी ॻाल्हि आहे त कॉन्फ्रेंस में शरीक तमाम मुल्क अफ़गानिस्तान जे मामले खे पूरी तरह ॼाणनि था। के ॿुधायूं पिया त वज़ीर आज़म इमरान ख़ान OIC जे इजलास के ख़िताब करे रहियो हो। संदसि चवणो हो त मुअज़्ज़ज़ महिमाननि खे पाकिस्तान अचण ते ख़ुश आमदीद थो कयां। संदसि चवणो हो त जेतिरियूं मुश्किलूं अफ़गानिस्तान जे मुल्क ॾिठियूं आहिनि कंहिं मुल्क बि न आहिनि ॾिठियूं। वज़ीर आज़म इमरान ख़ान जो चवणो हो त अफ़गानिस्तान 4 ॾहाकनि खां ख़ाना जंगीअ जो शिकार रहियो आहे। जी नाज़रीन के ॿुधायूं पिया वज़ीर आज़म इमरान ख़ान आलमी बिरादरी के अफगानिस्तान जे माली इमदाद जी अपील करे छॾी आहे। वज़ीर आज़म चयो आहे त अफगानिस्तान जी मौजूदा सूरत हाल इंतहाई संगीन आहे। OIC के पंहिंजो किरदार अदा करणो पवंदो। इस्लामाबाद में OIC जे गैर मामूली इजलास के खिताब कंदे वज़ीर आज़म इमरान ख़ान चयो आहे त दुनिया में इस्लामोफोबिया अहम मसलो आहे। OIC के इस्लाम जो असल चेहरो ॾेखारण जी ज़रूरत आहे। अहम ख़बर असां शेयर कयूं पिया। वज़ीर आज़म इमरान ख़ान आलमी बिरादरी के अफगानिस्तान जी माली इमदाद जी अपील करे छॾी आहे। वज़ीर आज़म चयो आहे त अफगानिस्तान जी मौजूदा सूरत हाल इंतहाई संगीन आहे। OIC के पंहिंजो किरदार अदा करणो पवंदो। इस्लामाबाद में OIC जे गैर मामूली इजलास के खिताब कंदे वज़ीर आज़म इमरान ख़ान चयो आहे त दुनिया में इस्लामोफोबिया अहम मसलो आहे। OIC के इस्लाम जो असल चेहरो ॾेखारण जी ज़रूरत आहे।